I'm Cori Bateman, I'm the head teacher here at Chantry Primary Academy. We're a 2 form-entry primary school growing to 3 form-entry. We've got an extensive leadership team. We have a complexity of having 2 special provisions in the school, so we've got quite a big middle management tier where the team leaders for those 2 special provisions are both within that team as well, so it's quite a complex school.
It is indeed. So what made you want to get involved with the coaching?
Too many monkeys on my back, I guess. Just felt that everybody here was expecting a bit of spoon feeding, and that we'd reached a point where we were so busy spending our time referring staff back to their line managers because they were coming to us as a leadership team with absolutely everything. We were having to constantly say, you need to go and speak to so-and-so, you need to speak to so-and-so. But they expected the head and the sort of strategic team to hold all of the information,
right.
where actually we don't. So we were starting to kind of get into the habit of answering people's queries rather than referring them back to line managers. So we went through this phase of refer everyone back to line managers, and then we found that things would still come back to us again anyway. So we were then answering queries and then having to feed back to the line manager the answers that we'd given to the queries.
Right.
So it clearly wasn't working because
Yeah.
we were going around in circles and just ending up still answering the queries.
Okay, so what difference did it make then once you'd done the coaching training to that?
I was at a meeting and met Monica at Ashcroft, who had done the coaching in schools, and she was talking about the difference it made to her working life and sort of personal life, I guess. And I thought, as I was listening to her, I was thinking, that's what I need. I need some mechanism, I suppose, or a system, a way of fielding queries differently. I need to be able to put the onus back onto people to do that for themselves and sort of build independence, because I was fed up of being the one everyone depended on. I feel a bit like that at home. I feel a bit like that at work. Everybody's just constantly coming to me to answer the queries because I'm supposed to know everything. So the coaching sounded like a great way forward. So the idea was that by having all of our leadership team trained in coaching, that we would start putting the onus back on the staff to find their own solutions to problems and stop expecting that spoon feeding of a solution every time. So even, for example, in things like lesson observations, they'll come for feedback from lesson observation, we'll feedback the strengths and areas for development, and then they're expecting you to kind of populate an action plan for them by telling them what their next steps are, what they need to do next to improve.
Right.
Where actually then they have no ownership of any of it.
No, of
So
course.
what we found through the coaching was that we were able to hand over that ownership back to the teacher to develop their own practice and to find their own way forward, which therefore would hopefully is having more impact. And I would say that from the observations we've done using coaching style and feeding back coaching style, that we've seen a greater impact. People are more independent and finding their own way forward.
That's really good. Fantastic. Wow. So that's obviously one difference that it's made in terms of how you've used it. How else have you used it?
Well, we try very hard to use it for the day-to-day queries.
Right.
So if people come to me, I'll give an example. Senior midday supervisor was frequently coming on a rainy, miserable day, or if it was a bit of mizzle, a bit of drizzle, she would come and say, was it wet play, indoor, outdoor, what do you think? And I would look out the window and make a decision on whether it was indoor or outdoor play.
Right.
The problem I was having with that is that every time there was a bit of a misty, mizzly day, she'd come back and ask me the question again. And so by doing the coaching, what I realised is that what I needed to do was to say to her, what do you think? And then she would make the decision. And then the next time she came back and she said, it's raining again today, I think we should, and then she would say either I think we should go out and then bring the children in after 5 or 10 minutes so they've had a bit of fresh air. So she'd make that decision and check it out with me, and now I don't see her. She doesn't make, she makes the decisions on her own. So I haven't made the decision of wet play for about the last 6 months.
Wow.
So.
Amazing.
It's a little thing, but it's one less thing to have to deal with.
Yeah.
And I just feel if we do that more and more often, so when people are coming and asking questions, and they're silly little questions sometimes, but it's not silly to them in the moment. They need that decision. Yeah, they don't want to get it wrong. So if they know that they have the power to make those decisions and that they've tested those decisions out and they're generally right, then they won't come and ask. The teachers themselves worked with the deputy and came up with the 7 key features of an effective lesson.
Oh, great.
So we didn't go with outstanding or good or any kind of graded.
Right.
We just 7 key features of an effective lesson, and they use that for all lesson observations now. So because the staff came up with that themselves, and then we use that to feedback coaching style. Staff, as I said, were much more on board with that. So the kind of action planning that they do then around that is their own, and then we come back to them and observe them again and talk about the action plan that they put in. So we then kind of the follow-up is the next step of the coaching, and then we'll go back to the beginning of that cycle again. And constantly picking up on what they said in the last one that they were going to do after their observation before.
So you're making sure they're accountable and just embedding it as it goes through.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
We have also used coaching with teachers who have longer term issues with their teaching. So if we've got requires improvement teacher, we've used coaching there. So what we used to class as coaching strict mentoring.
Yeah.
We now either use coaching or we use mentoring.
Okay. And has that had an impact?
In the case of one particular teacher, yes, and that's been quite a significant improvement. So we've seen it requires improvement, secure and good. Their heads are in the right place on improvement and self-improvement. So I think that's been a real benefit. And that will have knocked on to children because better teaching, better learning.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's just made me think actually with you saying that, better teaching, better learning, you've used it in your work with other schools, haven't you?
Yeah.
Are you happy to talk about that?
Yeah. So the head teacher that I've been supporting, the school had gone into it was just requires improvement in December 13, and so I started working with the school in April 14 when the school was technically without a head, so the deputy had stepped up to acting head in the absence of a substantive post holder. I think everyone at that point agreed that actually the school did really well to get requires improvement.
Right.
So it had a very, very long way to go, and it felt like as we were working together and I was asking questions and then she was exploring her school and we were talking things over, she was sort of turning more and more rocks and finding issues underneath. So every time we turned a corner we'd find another problem and another issue, and things were worse than any of us thought at the beginning. So we've spent a year and a term now together working. At the start it did start as a mentoring role because she didn't know what the job of being a head teacher was, so we did a lot of showing what that looks like. So once we reached the point where she was starting to do things independently, we moved that into coaching. So that would have been around October, November time, Christmas maybe.
Yeah.
So at that time we then were moving more from mentoring into coaching, and she wanted to troubleshoot and solve her own issues, which is exactly right and appropriate. So what kinds of things did we do? It's really things like talking through within the action plan what steps needed to be taken. So where at the beginning I was giving her the steps that I would take, I was having to sit on my hands a bit more and challenge her to think of the steps that she would need to take. So having had some of that mentoring, having spent time with me in my school and learning from my way of doing things, what would her way of doing things be? So I was very keen to start exploring that. And at that time she'd also been appointed as the substantive head.
Right.
So she'd made the decision, this is the job for me, I'm going to do it. And then almost as soon as she was appointed, she no longer wanted to be shown the way, she wanted to find her own way, which is absolutely right. So it was a really natural progression from mentoring to coaching. So once the coaching began, it was talking through the action plans and then what types of things she felt she would need to do. And then as we met week on week, we would be talking through the actions that she'd taken, looking at the next issue, the next rock she'd turn, and then what would need to be done there. So we were constantly using the coaching cycle over and over and over, so not just on one problem, but addressing multiple problems on a regular basis. In order to address the whole problem, which was the standards within the school. So sort of you break down the big issue, which is how do we improve the quality of teaching and learning in this school, and then bit by bit we sort of address one and then the other and then the other through a coaching model.
What's it like now?
What's it like now? Well, they've had a whole school review about 2 weeks ago. I've just had the report emailed to me this morning, actually.
Wow, how bizarre.
So they've been, so their SEF judgments have all been agreed. The SEF is an interesting story because the first SEF that we wrote, effectively I wrote, based on my observations of being in the school and around the school and the times we'd spent together in the school. And that's how it started. I did a lot of learning walks with her, I did observations with her. There was a lot of me being very visible around the school alongside the head teacher doing the work with her. And then as time's gone on, I've gone more and more and more back seat. So I sit, you know, I will come after a learning walk's been done and we will talk through what that's shown. And then using coaching, we will then plan what her next steps will be to address the gaps that she's identified. So she would identify the gaps, she would identify the actions, and we would just talk that through using the coaching model. So the SEF that she wrote, with her own judgments of how the school was progressing, which we talked through in coaching, that's all been validated. So they're now, they still have areas that require improvement, so their achievement and their teaching and learning, but there are much stronger requires improvement now. And I would say that they're heading towards good, and then the other areas, leadership and management, has been judged good by both themselves and by external review. And behaviour and safety, which was good in the Ofsted, although neither of us could agree on how that could have happened because the behaviour was shocking when we first got to the school. But that's it's much stronger now than it was. So they've got, and the review has said that if they carry on the trajectory they're on, and also come in nearer to Christmas than September, because it will be next term, that with the right team, the right progress in books, that they could come out of requires improvement altogether and get good.
That'd be amazing.
It would be amazing. I'd be really pleased with that. So so what we've decided is, because my formal relationship finishes with the school Friday, effectively, so at the end of this term I've been on exit strategy, that I'm now going to take over the role of head teacher's mentor in September. So I'll still have a link to the school, but it won't be a kind of a formal arrangement as it is at the moment. So at the moment it's quite a formal arrangement, and in September I'll carry on working with the school, so I'll be able to carry on being a part of the progress forward, but it won't be so formal. And she knows that sometimes I could just solve the problem with a snap of the fingers, but I would be solving the problem my way, the Chantry way, rather than solving it her way, her school's way. And what I've found is that when I have been tempted to give her the quick fix answer, she's delivered that answer differently from how I would have delivered it. And so the solution, the outcome hasn't been the same. So if I had taken my own action in the way I described it, I would have had a certain outcome, and have had, because she did it with a slight twist. So I'd explained how I would do something, she's gone off and done it slightly differently from how I feel I explained it, and the outcome didn't quite work. So and I guess that's been a lesson to me, that if I want this to work, it has to work for her and her school. So it needs to be her solution. It can't be my solution, because it's not me doing it, and it's not my school it's happening in. So I think that's where coaching, it becomes really obvious that coaching is the solution when you see your own solution failing because somebody else isn't delivering it your way. Yeah,
that's really funny, isn't it? The different perceptions.
So it's all the more reason to be using coaching rather than telling somebody the answers, I'd say. Because, I like that. There were a few examples where there was something lost in translation, and it just didn't come out quite the way I thought it was going to, because it wasn't done in quite the way I thought it would be done. I guess for me the most important thing is that if a solution that I would come up with and that I would deliver in my school might work in my school with my children or my staff, but it won't necessarily work in another school with another group of staff and a different situation. So it's very much horses for courses, and I think coaching allows somebody to come up with their own response within their own circumstances, which will be very different from your own. But it's interesting because the job of a head teacher's mentor They call them a mentor.
Yeah.
But having done the coaching, I would suggest that they probably ought to think about head teachers having a coach rather than a mentor, because if you are a head teacher, new to the authority or new to headship, you've applied for the job, you've been successful at getting it, so it's not a mentor you need. You probably do need a coach, somebody who's going to help you find your own way, rather than somebody who's going to come along and say, well, in my school I do.
Yes. Yeah.
So a mentor is very much this is what I do and let me show you. Whereas I would say a coach is what they need, which is someone who can help them find their own way.
That's really interesting.
That would be an interesting thing for a local authority to consider, is whether they have a head coach or head teacher coach rather than a head teacher mentor.
Wow.
And it is nice to see that what's been written in the school review is that the school benefited from a kind of a hefty package of support to begin with, but over time has developed the independence to manage the school and to lead the school forward on its own 2 feet, or their own 2 feet as a team. So having made the right appointments and got things in place, and structures are now set up, and structures that work for them in their school. So it's not like I've taken everything we do here and replicated it there. By using coaching rather than replication, they've come up with their own version. So they might have seen something here that works for us, and they wanted to do the same there, but they've made it their own through working it through a coaching system rather than just saying, right, here's the package, take it and go and deliver it there. So
yeah, so it's much more personalised, much more tailored to them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, fits the school's needs, and hopefully improves their outcomes even further. Even further, yeah. Wow. Because their results this year are almost double last year's.
Are they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Just from a few simple actions. I mean, and I can give some examples. We have a booster programme, and we have a comprehensive booster programme where we have children in different times of the days. It might be mornings, lunchtimes, after school, but every child at whatever ability level they're at, they will have some form of securing their level through a booster activity. But when we talked about that, it was very clear that that wasn't going to work for their school and their circumstances. So we worked it through and thought about, well, what could you do here? And so she came up with various options, and the option that she settled on was an extended day. So every child in year 6, because they needed to raise standards quickly, every child in year 6 stayed for an extended day, 1 day a week. So rather than go home at 3:30, they went home at 4:30. Right. So it was just parents were just informed. Year 6 are having an extended day.
Okay.
What are the arrangements for collecting your child at 4:30? So it wasn't ever a kind of opting out option.
Yeah.
Parents were just informed. There were no clubs available to year 6 that day, so it wasn't like they could have had a clash with any other activities in school. And then they brought teaching staff on board, and teaching staff stayed and did small group one-to-one work with the children that day, once a week throughout the entire year. And that's one of the factors that made a difference. But it's a good example of how we looked at what we did here, and she said to me, well, what do you do? Well, this is what we do. And I said, but that won't necessarily work for you, so what do you think you could do that would make the difference you're looking for? And that was what she came up with through the coaching model.
That's brilliant.
So,
wow.
And it's made a fantastic difference. They've got 85% level 4 in reading.
And what did they have before?
I think they've had 72 last year in reading, but their other results were lower. Their combined English, maths, reading, writing and maths last year was 37%, and this year it's 64%.
Wow.
So, as I say, it's not quite, but almost doubled, yeah.
That's amazing. Wow. So what would you say the 3 biggest differences are that coaching's made, either here or there?
I think for me the biggest difference is that I no longer have to carry the monkey, so I don't have to carry other people's problems around. I can give them their problem back. Nice. And let them work it out and support them in working it out. It's not just like I say, no, it's your problem, it's not mine. Yeah. I'm asking them questions to help them to get to the solution for themselves. Yeah. So that's my biggest thing, is that I am no longer having to be the answer for everything. They can find their own answers. Sometimes I have to offer more help or less help for them to get there, but they will get there themselves. For us as a school, I think it's had a big impact on teachers' independence in their teaching and learning, so they're now much more able to find their own next step. So where they've been expecting us to tell them, and now you need to, now they're saying, right, okay, so I think what I need to do is, and they're coming up with their own solutions. So it's changed their language around school improvement. And the other thing I think is that our leadership meetings, although it still comes up from time to time, we spend less time moaning about other people moaning, because the moans aren't coming to us.
Oh, that's
because
good.
it used to be that when people come to moan to us, really the moaning was a kind of a shroud behind which they're hiding a query or a problem. So once you uncover that and unpick what the moaning is and then sort out the problem through a coaching approach, you have less problems, and so therefore you have less moaning. So we spend less time moaning about moaning.
That's really good.
Nice.
That's brilliant, isn't it? So less monkeys and less moaning.
Less monkeys, less moaning, and more
Love it.
independence. So there's far less spoon feeding, and people aren't expecting the spoon feeding anymore, which is good.
That is good, yeah. Yeah.
Now the information's there, they just need to go and read it, find it, and act on it themselves. Whereas, I mean, so one example, another example, I like examples.
That's good.
One of Sarah's big things, Sarah the deputy, one of her big things was that we used to have a weekly diary. So she would produce an A4 sheet with Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and everything you might need to know that's going to happen in the week in school that week. And then at the bottom there'd be a whole list of bullet points of things to remember. So she'd almost draw out the information. So you'd kind of put two things in one.
Right.
There's what's going to happen, and then at the bottom there was almost a bullet point list of the implications of all the things that were going to happen.
Yeah.
So there's a drama group in on Wednesday afternoon, and at the bottom there would be, note, because the drama group are on Wednesday afternoon, there'll be no Key Stage 2 assembly, because people couldn't draw their own conclusions before.
Right, yeah.
Whereas now we don't even have the piece of paper.
Oh.
Now the information is all on the electric diary, where it always was, but because we're no longer compiling it onto a piece of paper for them, they are now looking on the electric diary themselves.
Wow.
So they go and find the information for themselves, and then they draw their own conclusions, and they realise now, oh, that drama group's in on Wednesday afternoon, therefore there will be no assembly. Because now they're not expecting the spoon feeding, because we just took it away and said the information's there, you need to access it.
So how are they coping with not being spoon-fed?
Well, in September they kept saying, when is it coming back?
Right.
When is it coming back? Because Sarah had gone and done a secondment in the other school that we were supporting.
Yeah.
And so there were a few people that thought, well, it'll be fine because when Sarah comes back it'll all start up again.
Right.
And it took a while to get the message out there, no, this is how it works now. The information's there, you need to go and find it. And then by the time Christmas came and Sarah did come back, they were then in those habits. So it just took time to change habits. Like anything, it takes time to change. So if we kind of took the crutch away and they had to walk on their own 2 feet, and now they can walk.
That's lovely.
That's nice.
You found them. That's really good.
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously you've applied it in loads of different ways. So if somebody's thinking of doing the programme, what would you say to them?
I'd say do it. I think it will change the way you work, it will change the way you think, it will change the way you troubleshoot and problem solve for yourself, because you almost have an internal coaching conversation with yourself. And with my coaching partner I can go back and say, right, can you just help me out with this, and then she'll go straight into a coaching model to support me in that. So yeah, I'd say do it, because it will have an impact on you and your organisation, whatever type of organisation that might be. I can't see that there would be any work environment dealing with adults or children, adults in particular, that coaching wouldn't have a positive impact on, because I just think that there's a big dependence of staff sometimes on somebody else to come up with the answers, because they don't want to take the responsibility, or because there's a bit of, I don't get paid enough for making the decisions, you get paid to make the decisions, you make the decisions. Whereas now I'm not getting paid for making the decisions, I'm getting paid for helping other people to make the decisions with me, or for themselves, in fact.
That's really good, really good. With you saying about paid and stuff, one thing sometimes people say is, oh, well, what about the money? It's quite expensive and so on. What would you say to someone that's a bit worried about the investment for the coaching?
Well, I think Money's an interesting one, isn't it? I always think that if something's, you get what you pay for. If something's surprisingly cheap, it's not necessarily the best quality. So I think it's about value for money. So for me, I have to add up how many man hours I've saved on not answering people's queries and not carrying their monkeys, and can I put a value on the benefits that it's had in staff in terms of their improvements, their self-improvement in their teaching. I can't put a price on it. So in terms of value for money, I think for an organisation like us, it was very good value for money. It's had a fantastic output, if you like, because the outcomes mean that we've improved, our teachers have improved, therefore everything for the children has improved. So if I've got a stronger leadership team, a stronger team of teachers and a stronger group of children, then it could have cost twice as much and it would have been worth it.
I'll remember that. Thank you. So last question then, if you could sum up the programme in 3 words, what would they be?
I think 3 words.
Or you can do one sentence if you like.
I think it was challenging to start with. I found it particularly challenging because I almost didn't want to give up my directorship, if you like, of answering everyone's queries. So it was challenging. Once I got over myself a bit, I found it then empowering and felt that, oh, actually, there's more power in helping people to do things for themselves that's more important than me feeling I was in control of everything.
Sure.
So I like the empowering part. And then it's rewarding because it's nice to see those people now making their own decisions and not feeling that they have to kind of check everything out with me all the time. So yeah, challenging, empowering, rewarding.
Love it. Thank you.